Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the virtual warehouse and port pollution town hall. My name is Tolani Taylor. I am the Zero Emissions and Warehouse Organizer for Clean Water Action, based here in New Jersey, and I will be your host tonight. Okay, just want to. So me, along with some of my team here at Clean Water Action, folks from EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, and other partners within the Coalition of Healthy Ports, who all contributed towards putting this virtual town hall together. And we're grateful that you're here and just look forward to engaging in this space with you all on a issue that has been impacting a lot of communities across New Jersey, which is warehouse development. But before we hear remarks from some of our guest speakers tonight, we are going to start off with an icebreaker. So just give me one moment. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Oh, Sam. Okay, he has it up. All right, perfect. So as our icebreaker, in the chat, just state your name, state the county where you reside, and then I have a question here. What concerns you the most about warehouse development in your community? So there's multiple categories here you can choose from. So you can either write down the number or you could write it out in the chat, or if there's another issue that is not presented here, feel free to jot that down. So let's just spend the next 5 minutes going through that, doing that. Okay. So time is starting now. For anyone who just entered a little late, we are doing an icebreaker. It's about 3 minutes left for this icebreaker. If you just look at the screen, just state your name, the county where you reside, and from the following categories, please answer the question that is there. What concerns you the most about warehouse development in your community? Okay, we have about 2 minutes left for the icebreaker. Again, if you entered late, please in the chat state your name, county of residence, and based on the following categories that you see numbered, please tell us what concerns you most about warehouse development in your community. And then give it another minute. All right, that we are going to end it there on the icebreaker. So thank you all for responding. Now, we will now be transitioning to one of our guest speakers, Gage Kerr, Assistant Research Professor for George Washington University, working under the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health. He will be presenting a recent nature study that he conducted involving the concentration of nitrogen oxide pollution near warehouses in the US and New Jersey. So I'm going to pass it over to Gage Kerr. If you want to share your screen.
Sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me just get situated. Okay, if I go, sorry, I think you're seeing my presenter notes, right? Are you seeing my full screen or not?
Yeah, I can see, I do see the presentation, like the
You see
beginning of it.
the full slide or just the first two slides?
The first two slides, but
Okay.
it's also showing the presenter notes too.
Yeah. Let me swap my display.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why my computer, there we go. Sorry. You'd think after years of doing this during the pandemic, I'd have it down pat. Okay, stop share. Okay, I think this should be good to go, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, sorry for that little blip, everyone. Thank you all for showing up tonight. I'm really excited to be here with you and learn more about some of the issues that you all are facing. As was mentioned, I am a researcher at George Washington University, and I do a lot of work thinking about air pollution and emissions and associated health impacts. A couple years ago, through a partnership that NASA enables called the Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences team, I was working with some environmental justice communities across the country. And me and the folks I was working with from George Washington University noticed this kind of common theme come out of some of our conversations with these folks. And that theme was that they are concerned about health harming air pollution from warehousing in their communities, but haven't really formally quantified this issue or been able to rely on the literature very much to understand the extent of air pollution at warehouses. So that was a great motivation, a great impetus for starting this work that has since culminated in a paper that was published this summer. Before I launch into my results, I want to acknowledge the co-authors from this study. They include folks from George Washington University and the International Council on Clean Transportation, as well as funding from NASA. And as I did mention, this paper was published earlier this summer in Nature Communications. It's open access, meaning that you can all access it if you'd like, free of charge. And I was really grateful too that a lot of media picked up this paper. So Verge wrote a story about it, Gris wrote a story about it, and then I doubt any of you have ever heard of this publication called the New York Times, but they also picked up the story, which was really cool to see. So before I get really into the weeds of my results, I want to talk a little bit about what we know about the warehousing industry in the United States. Back in 2023, there was a report published by the Environmental Defense Fund that focused on the warehousing industry in 10 different US states. And they found that within those states, about 15 million people live within a mile of a warehouse, and that children and many marginalized population subgroups bear the brunt of risk by living by these facilities. So that's really great groundwork for the type of study that we did. And I next want to show the warehouses that we considered in our study. We leveraged data from a commercial real estate database called CoStar because we weren't aware of any non-proprietary databases that allowed us to understand the location of warehouses across the US. And using this data set, what we found is that at the end of 2021, there were nearly 150,000 warehouses scattered throughout the US. So that's a ton. The map that you're seeing here shows the number of warehouses per 100,000 population in US counties. Now, when you look at this map, some of the, I'll call them usual suspects, jump out if you know anything about the warehousing industry. So those usual suspects include places like San Bernardino, California, King County in Washington, Cook County, Illinois, etc. But what really stood out to me in this map is that there are several rural counties in the US that have a really large number of warehouses per capita. If you take a look at the western part of North Dakota, which is where there's a lot of oil and gas production, what we see in certain counties in this part of North Dakota is that the number of warehouses per 100,000 people can actually be greater than the number in Los Angeles. And if I subset those results I just showed in the national map to New Jersey, this is the kind of map that we get. Now, instead of looking at different counties like I did in the previous map, this plot shows the number of warehouses in each census tract in New Jersey. So I would argue not a whole lot of surprises there, at least at first glance, as we see populated areas and highway corridors pop out. But then again, I'm not an expert at New Jersey geography, so maybe some of you are looking at this map now and surprised by the findings, and I'm happy to return to this later, or you also will probably receive a copy of these slides with this map on. So the last couple figures I showed gave us a snapshot of where warehouses were located in 2021, but now I want to think about how the average new warehouse has changed over the last few decades. Here I'm characterizing warehouses with a few different metrics, and those metrics include building area, the number of loading docks at each warehouse, the number of parking spaces at each warehouse, and then a metric that we define for our study that we call clustering. And that represents a measure of density of warehouses. So it's the number of warehouses per census tract. So now that the explanation is out of the way, I want us to first focus on the first part of those different time series, the period extending from about 1980 to around 2010. What you'll notice is that there's a flat line, meaning that most warehouses that were built in a given calendar year had a similar building area or loading docks, for example, as the previous warehouses that were built. But then you'll notice around the year 2010, which is just around the time that online shopping and e-commerce took off, we see this really sharp inflection point. And after this period, there are really large increases in the number of loading docks and parking spaces at warehouses, as well as in the number of warehouses in each census tract and the size of the facilities themselves. So next, I want to talk about how we can try to connect the warehousing industry to air pollution. I'm not sure of all of your backgrounds. I'm going to assume that you're not all atmospheric chemists, so I'll try to explain this simply and informatively, but you can interrupt me if I'm not doing a great job. So we're going to focus tonight on one particular air pollutant that's called nitrogen dioxide, or NO2. Nitrogen dioxide is a byproduct of fossil fuel combustion, so anytime we power power plant or burn gas in our car or turn on a stove, if your stove is gas, we're emitting NO2. Since most power plants are located in more suburban and rural areas just because of the space they need for their operations, we normally think about the NO2 experienced in urban areas as being a traffic tracer or a proxy for traffic. So that's what NO2 is, health-harming air pollutant, largely from traffic in urban areas, and leads to a number of adverse health impacts like asthma and other cardiovascular issues. So that's NO2. Now, how do we measure NO2? There are a different number of ways to measure NO2. A lot of folks use ground level monitors that monitor NO2 levels or concentrations at the surface, but the density of these monitors is really sparse. So there's not a monitor near every warehouse, for example. So because of that limitation, we turn to satellite data, and in particular, a satellite instrument called Tropomi. Tropomi is an acronym, not crucial to understand what it stands for. But what is crucial to know is that as it's orbiting the Earth, it's taking measurements or snapshots of the NO2 levels in our atmosphere. Excuse me. And the cool thing about satellite data is that it's doing so with complete spatial coverage. So instead of just having a monitor here, a monitor there, and then no information on what's going on in between those monitors, satellite data can help us get a more holistic picture and fill in the gaps. So using these satellite data, we took measurements or observations from the satellite at each of the warehouse locations across the US, so 150,000 different locations. And then we did some corrections to account for different direction winds at the sites because different direction winds can influence the NO2 pollution. And after accounting for wind, we get a composite that looks like what you see here on the right-hand side of your slide. So the way to interpret this composite is that if you're looking at the white dot in the middle, that white dot represents the average location of a warehousing facility. Parts of that plot to the right of that dot correspond to areas downwind of the warehouse, and then the region to the left of that dot corresponds to the upwind cleaner area. So once we have that explanation and can kind of interpret this plot, what we notice is that there's this bullseye of higher nitrogen dioxide pollution levels a few kilometers downwind of warehouses on average. Now you might wonder why there is this displacement between where the warehouse is located and where we measure from space using satellite images the largest increases in NO2 pollution. And likely the reason for that displacement reflects atmospheric chemistry and the fact that there are chemical transformations going on in the air from when the pollution was emitted at a tailpipe versus when it's measured by the satellite. Now, these results that you see here represent warehouses on average, but we also stratified these results based on the number of loading docks and parking spaces at warehouses. And what we found is that more loading docks at a warehouse equal more air pollution. We also found that dense clusters of warehouses, like the ones you might find in a major urban area in New Jersey, or the ones you might find in San Bernardino, California, those dense clusters are associated with higher levels of pollution as well. So as many of you were typing in the chat, you're worried about truck traffic and traffic in general at these facilities. And traffic, if you haven't figured out by now, is what we think is causing this increase in air pollution. Warehouses themselves likely do not emit pollution unless there's maybe some kind of boiler at the warehouse, but that seems unlikely. But we hypothesize, and what we showed in this paper is that it's all these heavy-duty trucks and delivery vans that are frequenting warehouses really at all hours of the day that are associated with more levels of air pollution. We also did an analysis to understand how traffic within the community in which the warehouse is located changes as warehouse characteristics change. So we defined a near warehousing area about the size of a 5-mile by 5-mile box on each side of the warehouse. So it's basically a 10-mile by 10-mile area. And what we found is that in that box, in that near warehousing community, when you add in an additional warehouse to that community, so that clustering metric I told you about, we find that that one additional warehouse on average is associated with about 1,500 kilometers additional truck traffic in that community. And similarly, we found that when you add in an extra loading dock on average at a warehouse, there are many hundreds of more truck kilometers traveled in that community every single day. So I want to start wrapping up now, and I don't know if folks can hear the sirens outside my window, but hopefully not. One good news thing to report about this problem is that we are not helpless. There are solutions that we have. We don't need to invest billions and billions in research and development. There are solutions that we could enact very quickly to ameliorate and regulate this pollution that's occurring near warehouses. So one of those solutions is having stricter engine standards on heavy-duty vehicles. And I am happy to report that within the last couple of years, the EPA has tightened their emission standards, meaning that the amount of pollution that's coming out of trucks' tailpipes will be reduced, especially as the fleet turns over and there's new vehicles. There's, of course, more that can be done, but at least this is a step in the right direction. We could also enact something called warehouse indirect source rules. So certain jurisdictions across the country, like the South Coast Air Quality Management District in Southern California, have enacted these rules, which require operators of the warehouses to offset the pollution that's occurring because of the truck traffic through other means. So maybe that's through some kind of investment in clean technology or renewable energy. And then finally, corporations could commit to phasing out their oldest, most polluting diesel vehicles. It's these really old vehicles that burn diesel fuel that emit the most NO2 pollution and likely have the biggest impact on some of the health impacts that we associate with air pollution. So having this gradual overturn of the fleet and getting newer vehicles could go a really long way in reducing the air pollution near warehouses. So I'll just quickly reiterate what we talked about tonight. I showed that by combining this commercial real estate data set that gives us information on warehouse locations with satellite measurements of air pollution, we could detect an increase of air pollution near warehousing facilities. And that increase translates to about a 20% increase in local nitrogen dioxide pollution levels. We also found that all warehouses aren't created equal when it comes to air pollution. Warehouses that have more loading docks and parking spaces, as well as dense clusters of warehouses, see the highest increase in nitrogen dioxide, largely due to the traffic and heavy-duty vehicles that frequent these facilities. And finally, it's so easy in the climate and environment space to be kind of doom and gloom and not really have a positive message. So I don't want to leave tonight without a positive message. And again, our positive message is that we have a lot of solutions to reduce the pollution that is occurring at warehouses. So things like more stringent engine standards, fleet electrification, and the enactment of indirect source rules could reduce the health harm and air pollution at these facilities. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Gage Kerr. Really great work on your end and your team. And, you know, it's something that the big concern, especially here in New Jersey. And I liked how towards the end you mentioned the importance of having indirect source rules in place to, you know, regulate these warehouses and the pollution that they're creating. That is something that as we get closer towards the end of this town hall that we will elaborate on, because there is actually a bill. It's known as the Warehouse and Port Pollution Act that was recently introduced. It's known as A4679 or S3546. But that is the bill number, but we're gonna touch upon that later on. Right now, I do wanna set aside some time because we're a little bit behind schedule here, just about 5 minutes for any questions for Gage Kerr. I want to turn it over to the attendees tuning in. Please, again, just a reminder, please feel free to pose questions in the chat. Just drop them in the chat as you hear from the next set of speakers. But I am going to open this up for questions if anyone has any out there.
Well, I'll just apologize. I think I derailed our time a little bit, so sorry.
No problem. You can either drop them in the chat or you could unmute yourself and say it out loud.
Oh, I see one in the chat. I can read it. Do you prefer to read it or should I read it?
Okay, I can read it for you.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So we have a question from Diane Stenzel. Were the 150,000 of warehouses since 2010 or in total?
Thanks for the question, Diane. That was the total number of warehouses when we just looked at the end of 2021, and like looked at a snapshot of how many warehouses existed in the US. What I will say about trends since 2010 that I didn't show is the number of new warehouses built each year has actually declined over the last decade. So maybe we've reached kind of like a saturation point. Now, that's not to say that it's still not increasing because the total number of warehouses is growing, but that rate of change, the number of new warehouses each year has actually declined a little bit in the last 10 years.
Okay, we have another one from Sam. Um, do, 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 do. Okay, thanks, Gage. Have you been able to share this information with large fleets? If so, what has been the response?
Thanks for the question, Sam. We actually did set up a meeting and got a meeting with someone who worked at Amazon. I did not think this would work, but I just emailed it's like help at Amazon or support at Amazon.com. I never thought I'd get a response, but I asked to meet as the author of this study. And someone from their ESG, their environmental focus team, reached out and set up a meeting. And this actually brings up a good point because I need to follow up with her and talk about next steps. But we had a really fruitful discussion and a number of questions for Amazon that she was going to do some digging into and get back to us.
Righty, and then we're just going to take one more question. Zachary Smith in the chat. What's your question?
Hey, Gage, really nice
Hi,
presentation. Thank you so
thank you.
much. I found the downwind effect really, really interesting. I wonder, everything that I've read prior to this has always made assumptions that emissions are highest where trucks are starting from a cold start, right? Which would naturally be the warehouse itself. Is there any, can you talk about whether there are any theories about that distance, particularly as it relates to cold engines?
Yeah, and I should emphasize, well, there is definitely pollution occurring at the warehouse itself. Part of that disconnect, that spatial disconnect I showed in the slide, probably results from, and this gets a little into chemistry, but there is a family of gases in the atmosphere called NOx, nitrogen oxides.
Okay.
It's comprised of NO and NO2. So they're two different kind of members of the family. They're both gases that are associated with fossil fuel combustion in traffic. Most cars emit NO, and then it's very quickly converted to NO2. NO2 is the quantity that we measure from satellites, and that's the quantity that the EPA regulates under the Clean Air Act. So what that means is there's often this displacement from where the emissions are emitted as NO and where the NO2 is measured, since that conversion, that chemical reaction takes, several minutes. So by the time the
So the
plume,
NO2 is heavier than and is coming down later.
yeah,
Is that right?
kind of,
Okay.
yeah. It's just that what the satellite measures is not actually what comes out of the tailpipe. It's really, really closely related, but one leads to the other, and that reaction takes a little bit of time. So that like plume or parcel of air has time to kind of blow downwind by the time the satellite measures the higher pollution.
Okay, interesting. And which is between NO and NO2, what is more dangerous in terms of inhalation? I would assume it would be the NO because that's more volatile, right? It could react in your body.
Yeah, the thing is we don't really even think about the health effects of NO because NO converts so quickly to NO2 that
Uh,
NO2 is it's really hard to measure NO because it converts so quick. So we use NO2 concentrations to understand our health impacts. So I don't even think of them as separate species, and I don't think of one being worse than the other. They're kind of the same thing.
okay. Okay, gotcha. So there's still reason to think that NO concentrations are going to be really, really high, just that you're not as easily able to measure them.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, cool. That makes a
There's
lot more
one
sense.
last
Thank you.
thing. There are other pollutants that we didn't measure in this study that we know are associated with diesel vehicles. Many of you have heard of, I'm sure, fine particulate matter, PM. That's not something we included in the study, but we also think that that's higher at the tailpipes.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you, and great questions. So at this time, we will now be hearing remarks from Assemblywoman Katz, who represents Legislative District 8, Atlantic and Burlington counties. She is also the one of the prime sponsors of A4679, the Warehouse and Port Pollution Bill. And that will be followed also by Assemblywoman Carol Murphy, who represents Legislative District 7, which encompasses Burlington County. So, they will, they're both representing South Jersey region, which is a region in the state right now that is currently seeing a very large influx of warehouse development due to the abundance of open space and farmland. So, yeah, so I'm gonna pass it on to Assemblywoman Katz.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. We've seen a huge increase in warehouses across the state in the last few years, and they're not only adding traffic, but they're also adding air pollution. Often these warehouses go into areas that are already overburdened. In fact, 2.7 million people in our state live within a half mile of a mega warehouse. We were originally going to have this town hall in West Hampton because it's something they know all too well about. That community has been organizing against proposed warehouses for years, and they sure aren't alone. In my hometown of Chesterfield, we've been fighting a warehouse coming into a beautiful golf course, and we haven't been able to stop it. I see it daily when I'm driving down 206 with my kids. There are 52 mega warehouses in my district alone. And this isn't just happening around me. It's happening all over our state. And I'm sure Assemblywoman Murphy is going to be able to speak to where it's happening in her district down 130. And I know that there is a place for warehouses, and I am not categorically unopposed to them. I like to get my Amazon stuff the next day. That's nice. But I just want them to be responsible neighbors. We have giant trucks that are rumbling down residential streets that were never built for this type of wear and tear. And that's why I'm really proud to introduce a legislation with Senator Mckeon that will bring transparency to where these mega warehouses are going and how they're going to impact communities around them. And so just thank you to everyone for all of the work that you're doing. As I have said, in my town of Chesterfield, we've been organizing against a warehouse that's proposed to come into town. And it's difficult. It's difficult for local folks to realize what they can do, realize what their options are in fighting these. And so having allies like you out there advocating and helping folks organize is so wonderful. I'm so appreciative for the study and all of the information that you've given us so that we in the legislature, that we can act and help you and support better policies. So thank you again for everything that you do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for those remarks and your support as always, Assemblywoman Katz. I will now pass it on to Assemblywoman Murphy.
Great. Thank you all for inviting me tonight. I think this is a great topic to start talking about. My name is Assembly Majority Whip Carol Murphy, and I do serve the 7th Legislative District. But as everyone who works with me and knows me, they know I represent everybody in the state of New Jersey because all the legislation we do impacts the entire state. So with that, since I got elected in 2017, my first year in 2018, and even before that as a staffer for 2 legislators, we have been seeing warehouse growth over and over and over and time again, especially down here in South Jersey, because as we start seeing sprawl happen, we're starting to see that a lot of the fields, a lot of places, especially here in Burlington County, that has a lot of areas that have been built up recently, not only with warehouses, but with mega warehouses, as well as businesses that create the ability for people to come instead of just passing through here, actually stop and do shopping. But more importantly, and I know everybody has had deliveries from Amazon. I think I have Amazon step at my house every other day. So we know the trucks are there coming through. And trucks has been the #1 issue that I have seen and I have heard time and time again. You know, it's not just being built on, the warehouses are not just being built on Route 130, but also in my hometown of Mount Laurel. Also in my other district towns, such as Morristown. We have three new mega warehouses between Mount Laurel and Morristown that are being built. And what does this provide? Because, you know, while we're looking at trucks and the pollution, and one of the good things about this bill that you're going to be talking about a little later, is the fact that this bill sets those regulations that is needed to say, okay, well, we recognize the fact that warehouses are coming into the state of New Jersey. Warehouses are coming into these towns. And as residents, and I'm putting myself as a resident now, not as a legislator, we know that they're going to be there, but we don't have to put up with pollution. We don't have to put up with the fact that trucks are going up and down our main streets. Not only creating more pollution, but also damaging our infrastructure on the roads, because that's another issue that we too have to deal with. So when we start looking at warehouses coming into our neighborhoods, the best thing that I, as a resident, can tell another resident is call your municipalities, get as much information you can on that warehouse and see what that brings. When we talk about trucks, the regulations that we put into effect, whether it is from with DEP or the regulations done through legislation, it is important to remember that these have a grave, impact, not only on our trucks, but all pollution, including the warehouse pollution, not only with the trucks entering and exiting, but also what comes out of the warehouse through the emissions that it projects as well. So, you know, there's a lot there as we start moving forward, because climate change is real. We're starting to see a huge impact on how climate change is changing, not only how we live, but also the air and the environment that we have around us. In Mount Laurel, New Jersey, which is in the 7th Legislative District, I can tell you that I sit as the MUA's chairperson. And we talk about not only clean water, but also wastewater. And we talk about how the pollution that's surrounding the areas in our lakes and our, you know, our streams impact our water supply. So when we have trucks that are projecting, you know, emissions through diesel and things of that nature, we're now starting to talk about how that impacts us as breathing, how we want to raise our family, where we want to raise our family. A couple of years ago, we did an environmental justice bill that would impact a lot of the warehouses within our lower income communities. And that was huge for us to be able to do that. Now we have to start turning out the regulations for those trucks. And I'll end it with this. One of the things that we did as soon as we got elected, is that I joined a group of my mayors who got together from Bordentown City all the way down to Palmyra, which is our Route 130 corridor, where we see is along a lot of the Delaware River, and start talking about how they're managing the truck routes. Because at that time, less than 7 years ago, we start seeing more warehouses coming in, from Burlington warehouses to Amazon, big Amazons being built in Burlington City and Florence, and, you know, more warehouses, not only in Florence, but also down the road in Willingboro, as well as Burlington Township. So we're seeing warehouses being built, and the vacancies, a lot of the empty places that are along Route 130, including Route 73, including, you know, Route 70, all throughout Burlington County, you see a lot of vacancies in previous stores, in previous businesses that have gone out of business, in previous malls, that warehouses are now starting to take up ownership of those empty vacancy buildings in order to be able to distribute their supplies. And as we start seeing, unfortunately, when we start seeing more and more online stores, such as your Amazons, and now you see your, you know, your Targets and all of those that are doing deliveries and online shopping. That requires more and more trucks to come into your neighborhood. So as we start moving forward, we need to make sure our regulations are put into place, whether they're through DEP or they're through legislation. And I can tell you, it's always great to work with both combinations, because we're able to get things done and start conversations, not only through legislation, but also through your local leaders. So with that, I'm going to stop there. And if anybody has any questions, my office is in the 7th Legislative District. I'm always available. We can make sure you get whatever contact information you need. I'm always open to talk with anybody about these subjects as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Carol Murphy. Really great remarks. And we also appreciate your support regarding this issue. I do just want to be mindful of the time. It is 7:46. There is one last brief presentation about the bill itself that we would like to transition to right now. So I am going to allow that to happen, but at exactly 7:55, we will stop and also reserve that time for questions, either questions from Assemblywoman Murphy or Assemblywoman Katz, or about the bill. But just want to flag that for everybody. 7:55, we will do that. So I will at this time to again go through a brief summary of the bill, the Warehouse and Port Pollution Bill. I'm going to pass it on to Sam Becker, Environmental Defense Fund project manager, who was also a key partner in just getting the language together for this bill, along with many of our other partners. So pass it on to Sam.
Thanks so much, Tolani. Really appreciate it. Okay, so I am going to be discussing some of the policy solutions, namely the Warehouse and Port Pollution Reduction Act. And so I think it's important to say that without taking action, warehouses and ports and the pollution that comes from them will continue to disproportionately harm communities of color and low-income communities, limited English communities, and it could also undermine the achievement of the state's climate goals. Fortunately, there are solutions that we can turn to. They look like this one that I'll be discussing in the following slides. So I'm going to be discussing a few key components, 4 key components specifically of this Warehouse and Ports Pollution Reduction Act, which is a bill collaboratively created by some of the groups that are present today. So like any bill, ours contains a number of key terms that I think are really important to understand. And so I'm going to be covering one of those important definitions, and that's regulated facility. It means simply 2 things. It's a facility used for the purpose of goods distribution, which has 100,000 square feet or more of business area, or 50,000 square feet or more of business area if it's in an overburdened community. It could also mean a facility that generates 50 or more truck trips per day, including a port facility or any part of a port. And you'll notice that the language here includes a greater focus on overburdened communities, and that's because we need to ensure additional protections exist for these communities, seeing as a disproportionate number of polluting industries are generally located in these communities. Next, I'll touch on transparency. Right now, there's little to no transparency around warehouses and other truck attracting facilities across the state. This bill would change that. It requires robust, publicly accessible reporting by regulated facilities, including business information, for example, location, owner, profits. It requires labor information, such as labor violations, employment status of workers, for example, are they unionized or not? It requires compliance updates about the pollution reduction that regulated facilities are making. It also requires public notice, hearings, and comments around permit applications, renewals, or revisions. Under the bill, I think it's very much reasonable to say that permitting and compliance are key components. And so the bill right now requires a regulated facility owner to get a permit prior to operation. The issue of the issuance of this permit is really not a given, and I think that's a very important point here. In order to get a permit, the state must consider whether a facility would contribute more air pollution to an already polluted community. It must examine existing air quality data. It must examine compliance status of other facilities that the owner operates, and it also must allow for community input and review. To ensure compliance, the state would also be tasked with inspecting a random number of facilities to make sure that they are reporting in a way that actually aligns with what's happening on the ground. And so these inspections will be mostly conducted at facilities that are located in overburdened communities. And any community can petition the state to inspect a particular facility if they suspect a violation is happening. Inspections that occur are ground truthed by using air quality monitoring, modeling, and truck counts. And I think, you know, again, it's just important to recognize that there are other tools sort of at disposal to ensure compliance laid out in the bill, namely that if a violation is found, the state can use a variety of mechanisms, you know, including just simple outreach, but then ultimately escalate to fines if compliance is not happening. One of the most exciting components of the bill, which Cassandra will touch on in a little bit, is the indirect source review, or ISR. It's what Gage mentioned in his presentation. And it's being looked at as a novel mechanism to rein in air pollution from the rapidly expanding e-commerce industry. It's showing a lot of promise in Southern California where it's been implemented. The ISR requires warehouse operators to earn a specified number of points from a flexible compliance menu, and these points are then sort of used to achieve compliance. And so a regulated facility will earn points by doing things like installing solar panels, by acquiring and using electric trucks, and by installing charging infrastructure for these vehicles. The bill also requires warehouse operations to reach zero emissions by 2050, and it requires speedier reductions in overburdened communities. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Cassandra to discuss some additional components of the bill.
Thanks, Sam. But Tolani, I know you said 7:55, so I can try to do a lightning round if I have like 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, that would be
All right,
great.
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so what is the viability of this policy? Next slide, please. So we know that we know that we can do this in New Jersey because a warehouse ISR has been done in California. We have the blueprint. So in 2021, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, we're just going to call them the South Coast for short, started implementing a first of its kind warehouse regulation called Rule 2305. And since the rollout of that rule, they've had 2 annual reporting cycles, and the data is pretty promising so far. As you can see from the chart on the screen, the rule has effectively reduced NOx pollution in the South Coast. So that includes Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and a couple different counties. It has significantly reduced the NOx pollution by 0.86 tons per day in 2023. So when you calculate that, that's 313.9 tons of NOx removed from communities in 2023 alone. And while there are many actions that operators can use to reduce emissions, one of the most impressive ones and one of the most effective ones has been incentivizing warehouse operators to swap their diesel trucks coming in and out of the warehouses and the diesel equipment moving things around inside the warehouse for zero emission or near zero alternatives. We can skip over the federal government portion right now. Just know that the federal government does not have a problem with states doing this on an individual basis. It doesn't have any Clean Air Act concerns. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we get asked all the time is, what are the costs and what are the benefits? So the health benefits are copious, right? We see that according to South Coast data and independent third-party reviewer data, the public health benefits are expected to outweigh costs 3 to 1. That's hundreds of fewer deaths, thousands of fewer asthma attack hospitalizations, tens of thousands of fewer missed work days, adding up to between 1.2 to 2.7 billion in health benefits and savings. And on the other side, the cost would be just 0.5 to 3.2% more on the existing annual operation costs of warehouses. And so there's also tons of federal, state, and even utility financial incentives right now that can help these warehouses electrify. So there's money out there that can help them to reduce any potential financial inconveniences that this life-saving bill might cause. So the time is now to reduce the diesel pollution choking our communities and pushing these businesses towards a zero emissions future. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Tolani.
All right, thank you, Andrea. Sam, if you don't mind, because I do want to get a chance to address some of these questions here. I'm going to address this anyway in my closing remarks, which I'll do at 7:59. But I do want to just do a transition right now to any questions about the bill, anything for Assemblywoman Katz or Assemblywoman Murphy, passing it on to everyone there. But let's look at the one in the chat from Diane. Is the permitting and compliance required for regulated facilities only in overburdened areas? What is the definition of an overburdened area?
I can quickly answer that question. So permitting and compliance is required for facilities in both overburdened communities and non-overburdened communities. However, there is an additional layer of compliance required for facilities operating in overburdened communities. They have to reduce pollution quicker. And smaller warehouses, those between 50 and 100,000 square feet, are regulated in overburdened communities, while warehouses of that size are not regulated in non-overburdened communities. And the definition comes from the state EJ law.
Great. And then I can actually take this last question from Stacy Fox. Thanks. What can we all do to support the bill? So as you know, it is 7:59 right now, so I'm gonna tie this into my closing remarks here. But one of the ways you can do this is by signing up to be a Clean Water Action member, because that's where you will often get at least monthly updates, especially on the warehouse campaign that I'm leading. Another is to, if you're not already familiar, but going onto the NJ Ledge website, and if you just type in A4679, S3546, that will lead you to this bill that Sam and Cassandra were speaking on just now. Also, just contacting me directly. My email isttaylor cleanwater.org. My phone number is 609-549-9390. Because I will be monitoring this bill and also just sharing updates with everyone on how they can take action. Definitely after this town hall, we'll send all the information out and let you know when this bill will be up for a vote, because at that time we're going to need as much testimony as possible. So for all those that are tuned in for this town hall event, thank you again. And I will definitely keep you updated on how this bill progresses, and we'll be reaching out because I will need your support as well as, others from other stakeholders, who are impacted by warehouse development here in New Jersey. So with that, I thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cassandra, for dropping the bill in the chat. It'll take you right there. And have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolani.
Thank you. Thank you.